Zohran Mamdani's victory is extraordinary by so many measures.
Thank you, my friends!
Not least in the simple numbers. Polling at 1% in February, he built and rode a wave of momentum all the way to one of the most powerful offices in US politics.
Fingers bruised from lifting boxes on the warehouse floor, palms calloused from delivery bike handlebars, knuckles scarred with kitchen burns. These are not hands that have been allowed to hold power. And yet, over the last 12 months, you have dared to reach for something greater.
A 34-year-old former state assembly member, an immigrant, a socialist, who appealed to a city where the affordability of everyday life has become a pressing political issue.
We will fight for you because we are you. Or as we say on Steinway, ana minkum wa ilaykum. I am young, despite my best efforts to grow older. I am Muslim. I am a democratic socialist. And most damning of all, I refuse to apologize for any of this.
A message that resonated through the campaign, sparking hope among his supporters last night.
New Yorkers needed a win. It's been a long year. We didn't get the World Series, but we got the best mayor possible.
This was a campaign ran on hope, and I think all of us felt it tonight.
We're going to make the city affordable. We're going to have free buses. We're going to have free childcare. It actually feels like somebody who lives here and feels our struggle.
न्यू यॉर्कर्स मुश्किल से अफोर्ड कर रहे हैं रोटी, कपड़ा और मकान. मैं ये सब बदलने के लिए लड़ रहा.
Mamdani's campaign fused old-fashioned shoe leather and FaceTime with a slick but authentic use of social media. It focused on key messages: free childcare, free fast buses, and a freeze on rents for nearly 2 million New Yorkers. And it was aided by the lack of a compelling opponent from the mainstream of the Democratic Party.
I'm Andrew Cuomo, and one of the things I love about New Yorkers is that you always know what's on their minds.
The man he beat in the Democratic primary, Andrew Cuomo, stood against him as an independent this time, well beaten into second place.
Congratulations to Zohran Mamdani. No.
But the former New York governor, forced from office over sexual harassment accusations, didn't stint in putting the case against the new mayor.
Almost half of New Yorkers did not vote to support a government agenda that makes promises that we know cannot be met. And we will not tolerate any behavior that fans the flames of anti-Semitism or diverse attacks.
During the campaign, Mamdani called Israel's assault on Gaza a genocide, said he would arrest Prime Minister Netanyahu if he came to New York, and has long sought to penalise charities linked to Israeli settlements. Mamdani was accused of being a jihadist candidate by one New York Republican. He said Cuomo had laughed along to the suggestion Mamdani would celebrate a second 9/11.
And we will build a city hall that stands steadfast alongside Jewish New Yorkers and does not waver in the fight against the scourge of anti-Semitism. Where the more than 1 million Muslims know that they belong. Not just in the 5 boroughs of this city, but in the halls of power. No more will New York be a city where you can traffic in Islamophobia and win an election.
So what lessons from last night for a Democratic Party looking to win midterm congressional elections next year? In Virginia and New Jersey, the governor's races were won by moderate Democrats, who also put affordability at the centre of their campaigns. Donald Trump is keen to make Mamdani the new national Democratic brand, calling him a communist, threatening to cut federal funding to New York. But first, offering an explanation for Mamdani's win, at once centering himself and sidestepping blame. Trump wasn't on the ballot and shut down were the 2 reasons that Republicans lost elections tonight, according to pollsters he posted on his Truth Social site. Mamdani himself, though, clear. His agenda points the way for his party.
And if there is any way to terrify a despot, it is by dismantling the very conditions that allowed him to accumulate power. stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up.
Zohran Mamdani will have to show he can lead a workforce of 300,000, that he can implement and pay for his ambitious agenda, and he'll have to fight a president determined to make an example of him. For all the drama of his campaign and his victory, much more is to come when he takes office on New Year's Day. Well, we're joined now by the political analyst Galen Druke, host of the GD Politics podcast. Thanks very much for your time after a long night, I'm sure. Firstly, top level, why did Zohran Mamdani win and win so well last night?
Zohran Mamdani started his campaign in the parts of New York City in the Bronx and Queens during the Democratic primary that swung significantly towards Trump over the past, I would say, 5 to 7 years. These are Latino and Asian communities largely, and he was out in the street asking folks, what's the most important issue to you? And what he heard time and time again was the cost of living and affordability. And so he really laser focused on those issues during both his primary and general election campaign. And so he was able to sort of stem the bleeding for the Democratic Party amongst some of the voters that have swung the furthest to the right in recent years. Now, of course, that's only part of the story. We also know from his primary victory that he was able to turn out young voters at a very high rate, particularly for a mayoral primary. And he did that again last night. We saw throughout the city that young voters turned out in droves. And in other parts of the city that you might not have expected to traditionally vote for a Democratic socialist, he was either able to keep the margins pretty thin between himself and Cuomo, or even win some parts of the city that are generally thought of as establishment aligned within the Democratic Party. And so he was able to piece together a coalition that I actually don't think we've seen a Democratic socialist pieced together before in American politics. I will say New York City is sui generis. It is a very democratic city that does not represent the nation as a whole, but still, of course, a significant feat for that part of the Democratic Party.
And to fulfill the pledges he's making, he's talking about this flat tax on the wealthiest. How realistic do you think it is that the governor might approve that?
If he seems to be really popular and have the wind at his back, I think it is likelier that the Democratic governor of New York will want to work with him. Now, will she be willing to work with him to the extent that she will raise taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations? I still think that's relatively unlikely because she has been so adamant about keeping taxes down. New York State is already one of the highest tax states in the nation, but perhaps they come to some sort of agreement or compromise there. I mean, I think the other thing to be watching is to what extent does Zohran Mamdani moderate once he's in office, or at least try to build alliances across the different parts of the city, including big business, Wall Street, the real estate developers. Because look, this is going to be the most high-profile opportunity that Democratic socialists and the progressive left part of the Democratic Party have to govern ever since Bernie Sanders burst onto the scene and made this an ascendant part of the Democratic Party.
And looking at the national picture, I mean, we saw in Virginia and in New Jersey, we saw these moderate Democrats with national security backgrounds charting a very different course from Mamdani on that front, if not on the affordability issue, winning with larger margins than he did. So what do Democrats take from that nationally? And is it more really about Trump's own standing than their strategy?
I do think it's worth looking at those gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia because, I mean, they were blowouts to a certain extent. These are states that Harris won, both New Jersey and Virginia, by 6 percentage points in 2024. Last night, the gubernatorial candidate, Democratic candidate in Virginia, Spanberger, won by 15 percentage points. And it looks like the Democratic candidate in New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, is going to win by 13 percentage points. And what that tells me is that the backlash to Trump is building. And it is evidenced in a couple different ways. Yes, in terms of persuasion, more people wanting to vote for Democrats, but especially in terms of turnout. We did an analysis looking at the precincts across Virginia. We saw that in the rural parts of the state, voters were not very engaged in this election, whereas in Northern Virginia, close to D.C., they were incredibly engaged. These are people who have been amongst the most affected in the country by the DOGE cuts that we saw earlier this year, and of course, the government shutdown that still remains in action right now. However, an electorate that looks like this is not applicable to a presidential election. Turnout will be much, much higher. The parts of states that reliably vote for Republicans will turn out as well. And so, Virginia did not all of a sudden become a plus 15 Democratic state last night.
And what does Trump do now? Because both men have made it clear that they're up for something of a battle between City Hall, New York, and the White House. And Trump has threatened to withdraw federal funding from New York. So how does that all play out?
There also seems to be some hinting towards calling in the National Guard to New York City. So the stakes are incredibly high for New York City. I think that what Republicans see in Zohran Mamdani and Trump in particular is a foil that they would like to highlight. Zohran Mamdani, of course, was able to win in New York City, but New York City is, for example, in the last presidential election, voted for Harris at about 70%. Obviously, that is not what the nation looks like. And we've already seen messaging from, the RNC, the Republican political group, and some of the congressional campaigns trying to tie Democrats throughout the rest of the country to Zohran Mamdani by, calling them socialists, calling them even communist. So there's a fork in the road, and we will see which path Zohran Mamdani ends up taking if he is able to try to maintain some relationship with Donald Trump. It doesn't seem likely that Trump wants that, but of course it will greatly affect New York City. And I do think behind all of this, Republicans would really like to create a foil out of Zohran Mamdani.
Well, Galen Druk, thank you very much for your time today. An interesting year of US politics taking yet another interesting turn. Thanks a lot for your analysis.
Thank you.